Alrighty. Hello, guys. My name is Alexa Camila Valdez. Today I'm going to be presenting my final project, and this is actually something that is very close to me because I am going to try and submit this to the UCI conference as an honors project. So let's get started. The title is How Sign Language is Processed Within the Brain and Its Regional Language Differences. Alrighty. So here's the overview. This is a very simplified overview of what we're going to be touching on. So some important terms, the intro, the origins, history, studies, and then the different types of sign languages that there are, and finally ending with the conclusion. Here's a very not so brief overview. So my connection to the topic has been, it's been very near and dear to my heart just because it occurred before the pandemic and everything. So this was when I was still in high school. I remember my brother and my best friend were in ASL, and that was what they decided to take for their 3 or 4 year foreign language requirement. And by the end of those 4 years, they were basically fluent. And I always wish that I could have taken a second language because I took French. And even though I loved it, I would have loved to also learn sign language. So it was that same friend, actually, Naya Ogden, who later told me about BASL, which is Black ASL, which we're going to be touching on, so I won't get ahead of myself. But later on in MSJC, I took a linguistics class with John Torres, and he is a huge advocate for ASL, for languages that aren't only spoken but signed as well. So he taught us a lot about the diversity of sign languages, the fact that sign languages are real languages, no matter what point of view you're looking at it from, be it linguistically or in this case, like a psychobiological standpoint. And then lastly, there is psychological research that backs a lot of this stuff up, so that's why I wanted to sort of touch upon it. So this is basically the only very long description, very long term we're going to have, but I wanted to sort of highlight it because it is so important. So it is the word deaf. We're going to see this used a lot within my presentation, and basically I just want to point out that there is a difference between deaf with a capital D and deaf with a lowercase d. So the word deaf describes people who usually have no useful residual hearing, and they generally use sign language as their first and primary mode of communication. This group of people are culturally deaf, and they would use the capital D when writing the term. However, people that are audiologically deaf would use a lowercase d, and these are people that would typically use speech reading, amplification, hearing aids, cochlear implants, as well as other assistive technologies. They may also learn sign language, but are oral, and they don't use it as their primary mode of communication. So that's important to remember if you see some of those terms, because I remember when I was researching this, I was a little confused as to why there was a capital D and a lowercase one. But there's also implications of the age at the time you lost your hearing, and then people who are deaf are categorized into two groups, which is basically congenitally deaf, those who are born deaf, and then adventitiously deaf, those who are born hearing but eventually lose their hearing, be it because of an accident or illness, or any other reason that can occur. The term deaf should always be used with a people descriptor, which I'm sure if you're a psych major you have heard this before, but you don't just say, oh, that's the deaf. You say, that is someone that is deaf, or that is a group of people that are deaf. You are always going to use that people descriptor. And then lastly, it says the phrase "the deaf" should not be used like by itself. Okay, so let's continue. Here's some other important terms, some things that I just want to clarify. Some of them might pop up, some of them were more just in the readings. So a coda is a child of deaf adults. One parent or both parents may be deaf. Examples of auxiliary aids and services are assistive listening devices, interpreters, note takers, captioning, etc. We've already touched upon that a little bit previously with the term deaf. Then there's the term hard of hearing. People often use the term hard of hearing to describe themselves no matter the audiological level of hearing loss. Typically people who use residual hearing, amplification, and or assistive technologies, and who do not use sign language as their primary mode of communication would consider themselves hard of hearing instead of deaf. So that is also something we have to take into account. Lastly, this is for the second part of the project, which is sort of talking about the diversity of ASL and even just well, specifically sign languages, but we're sort of diving into one of the branches of ASL. So I wanted to give a definition for the term AAVE, which is a specific way of speaking within larger categorization of African American English, or what is known as Black English. Then there's Ebonics, which has nowadays sort of been replaced by the term AAVE because it's now considered outdated, but we do still see it in some of the readings and some of the articles that I was finding, so I just wanted to clear that up. It's a vernacular form of American English that is used in the home or for day-to-day communication rather than for formal occasions. And then, we can also apply like code switching into there. So then BASL is Black American Sign Language, which I said previously a little bit ago. ASL, American Sign Language, BSL, British Sign Language, and then there is, I believe, one more that I'm going to touch upon later, but let's keep going. So before we jump into it, I wanted to clear up and sort of do a little recap of Chapter 9 in case you haven't read it. So one of the quotes that I really liked in Chapter 9 was, language, it is not limited to speech, but includes the generation and understanding of written, spoken, and gestural communication. So again, the book is recognizing gestural communication as being real communication. In order for a language to be a language, it has to have grammar rules, and even then we know grammar rules still have to be a little bit flexible because we have to be able to insinuate things, we have to be able to, we can make jokes and stuff, we can sort of take advantage of those rules once we learn them, but there are rules to the point where if someone is sort of speaking in a strange way, you can pick it up. So language basically has important survival value, and it is crucial within human relationships. We're going to touch upon how damage to certain areas of the brain can impair your abilities for language, and how that is incredibly detrimental because you are no longer able to communicate with your family. So basically, this is implying that language is something that has been developed and something that humans have been doing for however many years, because it has helped us in our survival, and therefore when we don't have it, there's very bad consequences to that. Lastly, language learning is dependent on specific parts of the brain, and thus damage to these can affect comprehension and communication. There we go, so we're also going to touch on that later. Okay, let's talk about language acquisition, and I do want to say that this is talking about spoken language, but in a lot of the research we're going to touch upon in a few minutes, we will find out that, interestingly enough, all of those areas that we're talking about right now also light up when people are signing. So it's not really that incredibly different. It is a completely different thing because you're also using your hands, and there's other like motor skills that you're activating, but I did just want to say that. So the role of Broca and Wernicke's area is uber important to sign language and any language. So basically, the French physician Paul Broca was the one that identified the role that played the role that sorry, let me catch my breath. He basically identified the huge role that the frontal area anterior to the motor cortex, which is now known as Broca's area, thanks to him, the role that it had on the production and comprehension of language. And interestingly enough, he did this because of he had a patient that had been unable to express himself or speak properly for almost like 21 years. And they just called him by I think it was Tan. And it was just because that was one of the very few words that he was able to get out, or any of the utterances that he was able to make. So that's what they ended up calling him. But unfortunately, after that man passed away, Paul Broca was able to, through autopsy, realize that there was some damage to this specific area of the brain, and therefore after multiple autopsies and other people that seem to have similar issues, they were able to determine that that area was probably having to do a lot with language, and they were right. Broca therefore concluded that damage to this area produced Broca's aphasia. Now that's interesting and important because that means that Wernicke's area can have its own type of aphasia. So 9 years later, which I want to stress, there's constant new things happening in the world, in this world of ASL, of psychology, of linguistics, of psychobiology, because we thought that there was this huge finding, and then all of a sudden 9 years later there's a whole new part of the brain that is also very similar to Broca's area, but in so many other ways is so incredibly different. So Karl Wernicke, he was a German doctor. He identified that there was a second site where damage produced a different form of aphasia, and that area was located in the posterior portion of the left temporal lobe. And like I said, that is now known as Wernicke's area. So I did just want to say that damage to Wernicke's area will create a person that speaks in what is essentially word salad. They're able to make words, but they just make absolutely no sense. And then damage to Broca's area is almost, I like to think of it as like a disconnect between your thought and your actual abilities. So the images you have in your mind, you are unable to express those. So you're almost trapped in your own head. They know what they want to say, but unfortunately they're not able to produce any words. So let's move on. How are sign languages similar? Damage to the left frontal regions is associated with production in ASL and producing ASL. So almost like a Broca-like aphasia, whereas damage in the left temporal lobe is more likely to produce problems in the comprehension of ASL. So a Wernicke's like aphasia. That's why I was saying that even though the book is mostly talking about spoken language, it is basically the same for ASL. And then Broca's area is also activated when producing signs, and Wernicke's area is activated during the perception of sign language, which is a good thing to stress. Sign languages and their origins. I wanted to bring this up because this is still something that very much harms the community that utilizes any communities that utilize any form of sign language, and that is that Aristotle had a incredibly damaging take regarding people who were deaf, and he essentially said that people who are deaf were not able to take care of themselves or make decisions, and because they cannot be educated because they are deaf. So if they are deaf and cannot be educated, that means they have no cognitive abilities. Therefore, they aren't human. So that's where we start kind of getting into a slippery slope. And unfortunately, that reasoning is one that has not gone away. And some people still will discount the validity of sign languages because of those very old forms schools of thought. So that's incredibly sad. However, the good thing is that the brain is essentially wired to acquire language, and therefore